when you're at the table, make sure you show the guest the label while you're opening it. Now you two took the foil off completely, okay? If you're ever going to study professionally, they'll ask you not to. They want to keep it down there, but they want you to cut it under the lid. When I'm bartending, I just rip it off because I'm not presenting the bottle at the table.
Of course.
But the foil is part of the presentation. So, hold it towards them. Come under this first lip, because you don't want to pour the wine over the foil. Turn your knife over, so you're never changing the position of the bottle.
Yeah, makes sense.
Hold that over. So that is what it looks like when it's presented at the table. When you're pulling the cork out, 2-stage. First stage, just get it started. Second stage, don't take the cork all the way out with the corkscrew. You have much more control. You don't spill the wine. If you get most of the way out,
That's what I did, huh?
Correct.
You saw it, huh?
come here with the hand. It just makes sure you don't spill wine.
Yeah.
That's all.
Or it doesn't go out too fast.
Just easier. So this is both a wine 101 and a tasting of these 5 wines. So we're going to start with some basic questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, what do you guys think your wine knowledge is? Where are you?
1.
A 1.
Yeah.
A 1.
I'm humble.
I like one, yeah.
A 1.
2.
A 2. All right.
What an asshole, right? So humble.
Depends how you qualify those.
Here's some list. It does, but I also like to see what I'm working with. How do you make wine?
Basic stuff, but what are the basics?
How is wine made?
You wipe the grape in the vineyard.
You do what?
Vineyard in the vineyard.
In the vineyard. Wow. Okay. So the grape is grown in the vineyard. The grape is made in the vineyard. How do you make wine from that grape?
You make it sugary, to get let it stay with sugar.
Okay. Why?
Because it gets the alcohol out. It creates the alcohol from the sugar, right? I forgot the process name, yeah.
The one we all call is
It gives off CO2. Most sparkling wines, except Prosecco, we can talk about that later. Actually, this thing it's the same thing. Once the wine is made, they add more sugar, they add more yeast, and then they seal it. In the case of Prosecco, they seal it in a tank the size of this room and allow the yeast to do its thing. And as it's in a sealed environment, as the yeast lets go of its CO2, it has nowhere to go but into the wine. It's a completely sealed environment. So that's how you get the same process, but this one's sparkling. Those aren't. Okay. Now, do you all have your smartphones with you? You have yours? Would you open a browser? Open the browser. Type in this. SMWE winecompanion.com. That's a website I want you guys to go to learn the basics about wine outside of this as well. Mm-hmm. It is designed in 12 easy modules, 15-20 minutes each. You go there, you study the modules, you will go from a 1 or a 2 to blind taste. If we were going to teach you not a 101 wine, but a 200 class wine or a 300 class wine, then yes, we'd have food. I'd show you how the wine tastes with the food. We'd talk about the variances. So the more you get into this grape juice, the more you're going to learn about how wine affects food, food affects wine. And if you want to continue, you'll learn about how to pour a glass of wine without seeing it and know what it is. We're not doing that today.
One day maybe.
Absolutely. You guys.
You pay for you to get a wine, whatever certificate or sommelier, education if you would like. I mean, employers should do that. So.
Well, if the service industry didn't have the single highest turnover of all the careers in America, more of them would.
I invest, he learns everything, and then he goes somewhere else.
They go somewhere else.
Well, then you sign a contract saying to at least 2 years you have to use that knowledge here. So,
for sure.
right? And there you go. And investing is good.
Just as well as I can grow Sangiovese. And they started to experiment by blending Cab and Merlot into Sangiovese, and they took it to people that make the laws in Italy, and they went, no, we're not certifying this wine. You may not sell this as anything other than a vino di tavola, a table wine. And they went, huh. Well, I tell you what, we're going to call it a Super Tuscan. We don't need to put your labels or your laws or your denominations on it. We're just going to make it a Super Tuscan. And we created that name, and Americans love it that way.
Of course.
They love Super Tuscans. So go ahead and start pouring. This is Belnero. Belnero means beautiful, dark.
It's very dark.
It is very dark wine. And this is a blend of Cab, Merlot, and Sangiovese.
Sangiovese, okay.
Just in the chair.
It has more smell to it.
Yeah. Let me get ready. I wish Davko was here, guys. He would enjoy it.
You left today. You left
today.
today. You couldn't wait one more day.
It's a full body.
It is.
Is it?
So, smell this. What's the difference between this and the Chianti?
I didn't smell the first one.
Okay, so that one was
But I
a
assume
little bit
this is
light,
much
not
lighter.
much to it, but this
Very
is
light,
more, yeah.
not a lot of intensity.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This has, you can smell the fruit, you can smell the forest floor, a little of the mushroom, a little of the earth.
Yeah, more earthy.
A little floral too.
That's the first thing I thought was floral. Go with a ribeye or a fence.
Mm-hmm.
Steak.
Yeah, this will go good with black pepper, more fat.
I wouldn't go with
Rice
black.
and
I mean, yeah.
You're gonna want something a little bit than this. I think that you'll find if you taste the Cristina Rosso next to this Rosso, you're gonna like the Cristina better because it's got more American style fruit. But primarily, if you take a grape plant, if you grow a grapevine in beautiful, rich, loamy soil and give it all the water it wants, you have the mushiest, the blandest, the least appealing wine grape you can get.
So you just have to let it be in the natural surrounding, let it grow, shake
no,
it.
no. You want to plant it on a hillside so there's
Yeah.
lots of drainage. The roots are never in a lot of water. You want to plant it in a place where there's just enough wind that it keeps the mildew off the grapes.
Yeah.
Plant it someplace that's cool in the evening where there's a fog that rolls in and it's hot in the daytime.
Sure.
We have a perfect spot in Serbia. I grew up next to that place, and we have the vineyards until we sold it to the Chinese for the cheapest price we could. You know.
And we have a vineyard back home, and that actually perfectly fits there.
Yeah, exactly.
doesn't
Yeah, exactly.
In the morning it's
Same
usually
climate.
like sunny, in the night it's like windy,
Foggy and
really
windy.
Foggy and cold. It's perfect. Grapes love it.
Exactly.
They want to be dry. They want to have just enough of everything, so they struggle a little bit. They want to be cool in the evenings. They want to be warm in the daytime. Too much rain at the start of the season, and you kill the buds. Too much rain at the end of the season, and you plump up and mush the grapes, or you mildew the grapes. Now, there are grapes that you want to get too wet and you want a fungus on, but you don't have any of those. Dessert wines.
Yeah.
It's
Dessert
also
wines.
called fortified wines.
No, we can talk about that in a minute. Most just straight dessert wines are because you have a grape that grows in a place that has just the right amount of moisture, that a fungus grows on the grape, pierces the skin, pulls the water out, and makes this really intense, sugary, not quite raisin left behind. They look terrible, but when you press the juice out of them, they make this seriously sweet and syrupy with hints of apricot and honey. They're called Sauterne out of France. They're also called Tokai out of Hungary. And they're made because of a fungus called botrytis. And they're really cool. The other way to do that is if you're in Canada and you freeze the grapes. There are vineyards in Canada that will grow Riesling grapes and won't pick it unless it's nighttime in the middle of December and the temperatures are 4 below. And you pick the grape while frozen, and you crush the grape while frozen. Because the ice takes all the water. And the syrup, what's left, is the pulp and the nutrients and the sugars that don't freeze.
So smart.
You make great wine. But you have to like really sweet wines like I do. I have a huge sweet tooth. Imparts nothing to the wine.
Okay.
Which is why most wines are fermented at the start in stainless. Because then they have a base to work with and they can decide if and how they're gonna put it in oak. When you put a wine, anything in oak, don't forget for fortified wines, we'll get to that a little later. When you put anything in oak, three things happen. Oak tannin and flavors and minute flavor changes hit the wine. So you get more tannin if it's new oak. Winemakers either use brand new oak or a mix all the way down to very, very, very used barrels that all they imply is texture. But the oak works with the wine on adding a richness, a velvetiness, a texture to the wine. And I liken wines like milk.
Yeah.
There's a difference between skim milk and whole milk. There's a difference between no oak and brand new oak that has been forever. Similar in texture wise. Okay? This wine has probably seen some oak. You can tell by how almost creamy the wine is on your tongue.
But the previous one was no.
Yeah, the Super Tuscan.
This one, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it says
It's
fermented in wood and stainless steel hybrid tanks.
cool. And in a lot of sense, all that means is someone threw wood chips in a stainless steel tank. That happens too.
But how do you decide like what kind of wood will go have a good effect
Oh,
on that?
whatever
wine?
There's only three. There's only three woods that you want to make wine out of. American oak, French oak, Slovenian oak.
Slovenian oak?
Yeah.
Oh.
Surprisingly,
It's
there's
something from our part.
there's great forests in Slovenia.
Absolutely, there is.
American oak adds the texture, adds a little bit of vanillin, a little vanilla expression to a wine, but then adds more cooking herbs like dill and cucumber and kind of green herbal expressions. French oak adds a lot more vanillins, but then adds cinnamon, clove, nutmeg to the wine. And Slovenian oak is kind of a bastard of both. There's a little bit of everything in Slovenian oak.
We are hybrids from Europe.
You are truly hybrid
A
Slovenian.
little bit of
So
each.
you mentioned the nutmeg. Does that mean I can make chili with it?
I do. I don't ever make chili without adding red wine to it. A nice oaked red wine,
Yeah.
a cheap oaked red
I mean, I'm
wine.
not gonna put hot on it. It's gonna blow off everything.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Yep. So when you age it in oak, it adds also more tannins, but it also adds a little more oxidization, so it softens the wine a little bit. You guys have tasted a wine that's sat open for too long?
Yeah.
Okay.
This morning, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Nice. Was that my outside voice? What are you talking about? Little bits of oxidization do really well with wines.
Oh, yeah.
Too much oxidization takes all the fruit characteristics off and just muddies the whole thing. It's just kind of terrible. But oak is still slightly porous, so it allows that to happen just a little bit. There's also fermenting and aging in cement eggs. Cement eggs
what is that?
don't add, well, they're large cement containers, usually fairly round.
Oh, cement egg shape.
Egg shape.
Okay.
Egg shape. Not little cement eggs.
Wait.
Next time, elaborate.
Well, yes, I see that.
I'm literally.
So, an egg-shaped cement container around half the size of this room.
Perfect.
And what that does is it lets the wine age, but it doesn't add vanillins or tannins. But it does add a bit of a softer texture. So, and there's a couple of wines that do this, and they're actually pretty good. But you got to get familiar with what the difference is. So as you are tasting and trying wines, look at the bottle, see if it talks about, in similar wines, how it's stored, how it's aged, so you can learn the difference. As we go more and more in depth into here, what I'll probably do one day is just bring 4 Pinot Noirs. One from Burgundy, one from Italy, one from America, one from South America, some aged in stainless, some aged in oak, so you can start to see the same grape, but what it's like grown in different places and why that change happens. Right now, the most important thing is you learn these wines, pick one you like, and for the next week, your job is to sell 2 of these bottles. Practice, get it engraved. Ways to get comfortable selling wines. First off, you need to open a lot of, in fact, if he has any wines by the glass when you're working, you need to open the wines.
Trust me, I did that.
Would
They
you
live
make
together
sure,
and he can make her, open
yep,
bottles.
would
all
you
day.
make sure that she gets the Smoothie Wine Companion? In fact, send it to everybody, send it to him so he can give it to everybody. This is a website that St. Michel has created that teaches servers Wine 101 in 12 different modules, 15, 20 minutes each. It's easy to just sit down after shift or at home. And they also give you a badge when you take a test at the end of it. If you have them screenshot the badge and email it to you, you'll know who's taken the course. But that way you start to at least know everyone's got the same basic knowledge and familiarity, and we can grow from there. Okay? But learn from the Smoothie Wine Companion how to present the wine and open the wine and pour the wine at the table. Okay? That is critical before you learn more about the wine. Understand? And yes, you can take practice. Open a bottle of sparkling wine, hold it at 45 degrees. If you can, have a towel in your hand to cover the top, because sometimes you're going to lose it. Okay? 45 degrees gives the gas the best way to escape and escape safely. Okay? Hold it at 45 degrees, peel the cap off. Every single twist has 5 twists. Every one of them. Every champagne, every Prosecco, every Cava. Same number of twists. As you're twisting, hold your finger over the top. Okay? Then transfer, pull that off, put it in your pocket, hold your finger over the cork. Now, turn the bottle. If you turn the cork, there are times your hand is off the cork. If you're going to lose control of the cork because it's under pressure, it's at that moment. Hold the cork, turn the bottle. Once it gets to the point where it's mostly loose, wiggle it, crack it. Don't ever do this.
Yeah. What?
Not in a restaurant. Do it at home all day long. The dog loves it.
When I was training, I had to open a bottle, and I was not supposed to make any sound.
Yep.
So it was very hard to do that. That's the hardest thing. If it makes a little bit of noise, you won't feel it.
But a little bit of noise is fine.
Yeah.
But you want to, but practice with those two. Keep the warmth into the night. So these wines have this beautiful, moderated, warm temperature in their roots and their soil, even as things start to cool down in the air. That starts to change. So yes, a lot has to do with the soil, but just as much of water drainage, just as much how much sun. But the primary difference, American vine rootstock, and it didn't have, the French vines had no defense against it. The whole French wine industry collapsed. Okay? England went, huh. And so they bought up a bunch of vineyards in Portugal, which hadn't had this issue. Their vines were fine. So they bought all these vineyards in Portugal and built all this stuff. And their plan was to just rush in and make a wine and import it to England and take over from all the French that can't ship any wines anymore. They didn't pay a lot of attention to taking care of the wine or the winemaking. So the wine got to England, it was crap. It was absolutely terrible. So they're like, what do we do with this? It was bruised from shipping, it was too young. They didn't know what to do with it. So somebody was like, let's pour some brandy in it and see what happens. So they took some brandy, poured it in the wine, tasted it, and it was even worse. It was absolutely horrible. So they're like, oh, let's just put this away because I don't even want to think about it. So they sealed up that keg, tossed it in the cellar for a couple years. And 3 years later, someone went, I wonder what that tastes like now. And cracked it open and it was like light bulbs. Oh my God. So the brandy and the wine and the oak interacted to make this fortified, beautiful, sweet type of wine. And what they learned is take a dry acetic red wine and add instead of an aged colored brandy, they add a brand new, almost vodka clear that they distilled from grape juice and added that to it, and they let that rest. And once it hits about 20 years, it's amazing. When it hits 40 years, it's ambrosia. It sits on your tongue and it's like angels are dancing on your tongue. There's now a number of different kinds of fortified wines and different methods of production. You've heard of Madeira?
Yeah.
Okay. Madeira is fortified with heat. Because they learned some of the barrels at the bow of the ship during long transits got a lot of heat on them, and it tasted very different than the barrels on the back of the ship that were under the bottom. They come to learn that heat affects wine, oxygenates it, and has a change to it similar. So those are fortified and strengthened, but then also put into equivalent of a little sun oven for a while. Sherries are made with a little different. Sherries are made with very specific Spanish grapes and a very specific yeast that ends up being sweet. But primarily when Americans are talking about fortified wine, they're talking port, mostly. But there's 4 or 5 different types of fortified wines, all made significantly different. But the most common is port.
Why do they taste so well with cigars?
Yeah, isn't that weird?
Why? I have no clue.
Because humans are weird.
Have y'all ever watched people that really smoke cigars? They're a brandy, a wine, a port
They'll dip it with
sherry.
brandy, wine, port, sherry. They'll dip it in that just to add a little flavor to it.
It's weird.
I used to have to do cigar service back when you could smoke in restaurants. Not my favorite.
Cigar service?
Yeah.
Elaborate.
Cigars.
Sure. Back when I started this restaurant, I was 19 years old. All right. It was back when you could still smoke in a restaurant. We would bring around. I worked in private dinner clubs, so very, very, very fine dining. We'd bring a dessert cart after a meal. We'd show dessert. We'd slice at the table. We'd give it to them. We'd follow up with a brandy cart with all brandies and cognacs and a cigar box and a humidor. We'd offer, and you couldn't smoke cigarettes in the restaurant. All you could smoke were these really, really nice cigars. And we'd offer the cigar, and you'd pick it, and we'd see if he wanted a brandy, a cognac, a Grand Marnier, something to go with it. And then I'd take a little clipper, and I'd clip the end off it. And you don't use matches on cigars. You don't want any sulfur. So I would have to actually light another device that I would use, because you don't use a lighter for the propane, you don't use matches for the sulfur. You actually have to light a stick. Let that stick rest. Usually cedar, because it added a nice flavor to it. And you bring it over and you light the cigar for them in the restaurant.
I was working for Meridian and we had a cigar room, and
Yep.
we had a cigar trolley ever as well.
Yep.
So I was doing that for them, and it was like they had so many different types of cigars. Every single thing has flavor to it. Even the leaves, the tobacco leaves.
Same concept of wine.
Yep.